Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to do another prologue analysis, and this is for the opening of Waylander by David Gemmell. And it was the third Drenai book that he published. David Gemmell was one of my favorite authors when I was younger. And there are aspects of this opening. In terms of spoilers, I'm not going into the rest of the book. It is perfectly safe to watch this because I'm just looking at basically the first page and a half. But Waylander was one of those books that I really enjoyed when I was younger. And a lot of it has to do with the the look that Gemmell took at aspects of creating heroes. A lot of Gemmell's writing is very much about who is a hero and trying to recreate that. In some respects, going back almost to the tradition of sword and sorcery or sword and sandal, stuff like Hard's Hyboria, the Conan stories, or King Kull. That it's very much almost like an old school form of fantasy. And as a British author, he was actually writing in a tradition that had been so heavily dominated by Tolkien that this at the time felt very much like a reaction against Tolkien. It was much grittier, it was more focused and down to earth, and is the sort of book that is closer really to The Black Company by Glenn Cook than it is to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. It's much smaller in scope, much more focused. And you can see a lot of that in this opening. So, they had begun to torture the priest when the stranger stepped from the shadows of the trees. Now, as first lines go, that's a pretty good one. You start with, they had begun to torture the priest. Um, it's an arresting opening. And what's interesting about it is that this sets it up as quite a dark world already. That the opening line. Now, I know in the modern day when we talk about Grimdark and the things that we see there, this might actually seem a little tame. But remember, this was not published today. This is before Grimdark had established itself as a sort of genre or subgenre. And so this was a very interesting way to open up a fantasy novel. They had begun to torture the priest when the stranger stepped from the shadows of the trees. You stole my horse, he said quietly. The five men spun round. Beyond them, the young priest sagged against the ropes which held him, raising his head to squint through swollen eyes at the newcomer. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, and a black leather cloak was drawn about him. Where is my horse? He asked. So I'm just going to pause here. And as you can see, I've highlighted a couple of things. The first is tall and broad-shouldered is obviously a description of this stranger. It is a masculine ideal. Height and breadth of shoulder is getting across that he is a masculine character, heroic in proportions, that kind of description. Now, it's not entirely filled in. It's the beginning of a sketch of that. But the first thing they note is his height and his shoulders. And when I say they notice, the perspective in this is not with the stranger, nor is it with the priest. The perspective is much closer to the group that is torturing the priest. So how do I know this? Well, for a start, let's think about it in what we discuss in terms of psychic distance. So they had begun to torture the priest. So there's an inclusivity in that perspective, meaning that it's their actions and it's assumed that they are a group. It's referring to them. So that's where the narrative is resting. That's where the point of view is resting. And then the stranger stepped from the shadows of the trees. So the stranger, the perspective can't be with him because he wouldn't think of himself as the stranger. He is strange to them. So the perspective must be with them or could be with the priest. And we even get a hint of that because the young priest sagged against the ropes which held him, raising his head to squint through swollen eyes at the newcomer. So why am I suggesting that the perspective is actually with the group torturing the priest and not the priest, when we get this whole thing of the priest looking up to take in what the stranger looks like, and then that's where we get the description? And part of that is the young priest, that we, if the perspective was with him, we would expect him to think of himself by his name, or for the narrative to describe him by name as the named individual that the perspective is resting with. But we don't know the priest's name. The priest's name is not given away. So the priest is referred to in terms of their role. So they had begun to torture the priest, and then it's the young priest. So the familiarity is not with the priest. The familiarity is not with the stranger. The familiarity is with the group of the five men. So that's where I'm getting the point of view from. And it's one of these important things with understanding perspective about where the story is being told from. Because even without focalization, narrative perspective is an important consideration, because it will tell you how we are viewing the scene, or how the scene might be viewed. So in addition to the stranger being described as tall and broad-shouldered, we have the stranger wearing a black leather cloak. So just stick that in the back of your head. Black leather cloak, that's the immediate thing that leaps out. This guy steps out, he's tall and broad-shouldered, and he's wearing a long black leather cloak. Something that's hardy, something that is protective, but also usually leather, if it was a natural leather, you would expect it to be brown. So this appears to have been dyed in some way to make it black. So there's either a fashion statement being used, or there's a reason why it is black. Where is my horse? He asked. So this is an interesting thing. A stranger steps out from shadows, so has been hidden and steps out in a way to confront a group of men who are torturing someone. And the first thing he does is he does not challenge them about what they are doing. He's not commenting on the fact that they are torturing someone. He hasn't mentioned it. He doesn't say hello. He steps out, and the first thing he says is not an accusation. It's not anything like that. It's a simple, straightforward, and quiet, "You stole my horse." So this is quite unsettling. So we're picturing a scene. 5 people are torturing a man, and another man appears. And the first thing he says is quietly, "You stole my horse." Simple statement of fact. And then follows it up with a question: where is my horse? So again, this person is not some paladin, some knight errant, some heroic figure from legend stepping out going, "Unhand him, let the priest go." He's not there to save the priest. The first thing he's concerned about is, "You're the guys that nicked my horse. Where's my horse? I want my horse back." So with those 2 short 4-word each sort of pieces of dialogue, there's a lot being communicated about the type of character this stranger is. So we know they're tall, we know they have broad shoulders, so they're physically imposing, at least that's being suggested. They're wearing a long black leather cloak. So that is, again, emphasizing a sort of darkness and a mysteriousness. They have stepped out from shadows, which, again, think of the play of light and dark and how we read a lot of morality into that. And his first thing that he is concerned about is, "You stole my horse." So self-serving, self-interested, not concerned about a priest being tortured. This comes across as a very morally ambiguous character. "Who is to say? A horse is a horse, and the owner is the man who rides him," answered Dectus. So this goes to the point that I mentioned at the beginning about where the narrative perspective is. Dectus is named. So there's a closeness of narrative perspective to that character because we have their name. It is psychically closer, emotionally closer than the stranger or the priest. This is a named person. So this confirms this idea of the narrative perspective. When the stranger first spoke, Dectus had felt the thrill of fear course through him, expecting to find several men armed and ready. So this is setting up what we kind of thought, that someone was stepping in and there's going to be a group of men in a big fight. But now, as he scanned the trees in the gathering dusk, he knew the man was alone, alone and mad. So I want to stop here because there's a couple of interesting points that we can extract from this. First of all, Dectus felt the thrill of fear, that adrenaline. There's something slightly disturbing about this. It's not a shock of fear. Thrill is something that is actually, in some ways quite enjoyable. So Dectus is that type of person. Plus, they're involved in torturing a priest. So we're getting quite a negative impression of Dectus. Secondly, as he scanned the trees in the gathering dusk, we now get a time period. So it is dusk, it is evening time, long dark shadows. So it's not bright sunlight in the middle of the day, but there's still light, there's still daytime, but it is the evening. So we're now being able to picture the scene slightly clearer. We know there are trees, we know the time of day. These little details are just being filled in as he scanned the trees. So we know the first reaction that Dectus has, he spins round, sees the stranger, and then scans for other people, other threats. So that is all being suggested very, very quickly and neatly. And then we get the judgment. He knew the man was alone, alone and mad. So the narrative is giving us the internal thoughts of Dectus, now completely confirming where the narrative perspective is. And we also get a sense of who Dectus is because he sees this man and goes, this man is alone and mad. And why do we know that he is thinking this? We're told it. Why do we think he is thinking this? Because Dectus and 4 cohorts are torturing someone, and this guy steps out and accuses them of stealing his horse. 1 guy against 5, not good odds, and they are clearly violent men who enjoy inflicting pain. So he assumes that this guy is crazy. Why would you step out and accost 5 other people? So we get an idea of Dectus's confidence and also an aspect of his morality. The priest had proved but sorry sport. Just going to pause here. So this is confirming that Dectus is not a nice person, that he enjoys inflicting pain because he thinks of this torture as fun. And because the priest gritted his teeth against the pain, was offering neither curse nor plea, he's not getting as much enjoyment from it as he should, because the priest refuses to cry out, refuses to scream, refuses to beg. Those are all things that Dectus wants him to do. So Dectus is not a nice person, as if we needed further confirmation of it. But you can see in a couple of very short lines, Gemmell has told us the time of day, told us the setting, given us an implication of who this stranger is, let us know that there's a priest being tortured, and the group that torturing him are not only evil because they are doing this torture, but they enjoy the torture. So it's giving us a sense of who they are as people. And has created this scene very, very quickly. And the fact that Dectus had a smart aleck reply, who's to say a horse is a horse and the owner is the man who rides him? Possession is 9/10 of the law. It's that sort of smartass. So he is someone who, while being immediately surprised, is confident and also quite quick thinking and quick on his feet. And all of this has been sketched out. "Fetch the horse," said the man, a note of boredom in his deep voice. So we've had the man being quiet, we've had the man speaking normally, and now a note of boredom. This man is not acting or reacting the way that we would assume someone who is outnumbered by a group of violent assailants who enjoy torturing is going to ordinarily be assumed to react. This is coming across of either supremely confident, and there'll be a reason for it, or, as Dectus seems to suspect, the person is mad. But a note of boredom does not suggest madness. It suggests that this man has better things to do with his time than waste his time with 5 brigands. And we also get his deep voice. Broad shoulders, tall, deep voice. Little tiny facets of information that are emphasizing the physicality and power and masculinity of the character. Take him, ordered Dectus, and swords sang into the air as the 5 men attacked. Swiftly, the newcomer swept his cloak over one shoulder and lifted his right arm. A black bolt tore into the chest of the nearest man. A second entered the belly of a burly warrior with upraised sword. The stranger dropped the small double crossbow and lightly leapt back. One of his attackers was dead, and a second knelt, clutching the bolt in his belly. So just in this short paragraph, we have the order from Dectus saying to attack. They all draw their swords, and within the same paragraph, one is already dead from a crossbow bolt to the chest, and another is doubled over with a crossbow bolt in the belly. So very quick action. And included in this action, this person, this stranger, has fired a double crossbow and dropped it. So this is an incredibly quick, almost quick draw action. This is very similar to what we would see in a Western of the gunslinger throwing the cloak over one shoulder, drawing their pistol, shooting 2 people, and then holstering it again. That very quick, violent action that mercilessly dispatches foes. So there's an evocation of the Western here. But I also want to draw attention to the fact that it's a black bolt. So the guy's wearing a black cloak. The bolts of his crossbow are black. We're getting a sense of something slightly sinister here, because why would you blacken bolts? This is all implying that this guy is not a nice guy, that there's something stealthy about him. And anyone familiar with D&D would think of, as soon as you get these sorts of hints about what clothing he's wearing and the fact that the bolts are blackened, you're thinking assassin or rogue of some type. But it still has the connotation of immoral or not virtuous. And certainly, this person hasn't issued a challenge, hasn't tried to free the priest, hasn't done any of those things. They accused them of stealing their horse, asked for the horse, demanded it, and when this wasn't complied with, shot 2 of them. Yep, these people drew their swords, and this guy immediately shoots 2 of them with crossbow bolts. So there's a lot of very rapid action here. The newcomer loosened the thong which held his cloak, allowing it to fall to the ground behind him. From twin sheaths, he produced 2 black-bladed knives. So even if you thought I was being slightly too emphatic about, well, it's a black cloak and black bolts, now we know the knives have their blades blackened as well. There's a certain color scheme going on here. A man steps out of the shadows wearing black, armed with black. His weapons are black. Everything about this is sort of screaming, you know, look at me, I'm dressed all in black. It's very slimming. But it seems to be a lot of color coding, because this is what Gemmell is choosing to focus on and choosing to tell us. But he loosened the thong which held his cloak, allowing it to fall to the ground. So he's freeing himself up in terms of movement and produces 2 knives. He doesn't draw a longsword. He doesn't have a sword and shield. He has knives. And these are not sort of the typical weapons of your knight or warrior or anyone like that. These are assassin weapons, rogue weapons, thief weapons. Fetch the horse, he ordered. So we've gone from speaking quietly to saying to them, fetch the horse, and now ordering, fetch the horse. That we see his demeanor is slowly becoming sterner and almost angrier, but he seems very much in control. He doesn't yell angrily. He ordered. There's authority to what he is doing. The remaining 2 hesitated, glancing to Dectus for guidance. So Dectus is the leader. Black blades hissed through the air, and both men dropped without a sound. Dectus was alone. And if we think, Dectus had initially thought this stranger is alone and mad because Dectus had 4 people with him. Now Dectus is standing alone, and we have seen how quickly this person has dispatched 4 armed brigands. This is a frightening level of violence, and it's not done in anger. It's been done dispassionately. It's not done with righteous fury. It has been done quietly and without any sort of war cry. He has just dispatched them, shot 2 with a crossbow bolt, and then thrown 2 knives accurately enough and hard enough that it kills both of them instantly. You can have the horse, he said, biting his lip and backing towards the trees. The man shook his head. Too late, he answered softly. And so we've returned to the man being quiet then, almost resigned. Dectus turned and sprinted for the trees, but a sharp blow in the back caused him to lose balance and his face ploughed the soft earth. Pushing his hands beneath him, he struggled to rise. Had the newcomer thrown a rock, he wondered. Weakness flowed through him, and he slumped to the ground. The earth was soft as a feather bed and sweet-smelling like lavender. His leg twitched. And so this stranger, this newcomer, pulls out a double crossbow, shoots 2, then drops his cloak away, pulls out 2 knives, dispatches the next 2. And in the space of someone turning around and starting to run, has somehow dispatched him. And because it's with his perspective, we get his confusion. He doesn't know what the stranger has done. Although we're going to now assume that the stranger threw another knife. But because the perspective is with Dectus, he feels something thudding into him, a sharp blow in the back, and he falls forward and then struggles to try to lift himself up. And then we don't even get fade to black. It becomes his leg twitched. So Gemmell doesn't describe Dectus dying, but he lets us know with that his leg twitched, this guy is now dead. The newcomer recovered his cloak and brushed the dirt from its folds before fastening the thongs at the shoulder. Then he recovered his 3 knives, so we are right that he threw a knife at Dectus. Then he recovered his 3 knives, wiping them clean on the clothes of the dead. Lastly, he collected his bolts, dispatching the wounded man with a swift knife cut across the throat. He picked up his crossbow and checked the mechanism for dirt before clipping it to his broad black belt. Without a backward glance, he strode to the horses. And this is, I think, a really fascinating paragraph. In this is straightforward, meticulous, and careful. He picks his cloak up first, brushes the dirt from it, and then fastens it at his shoulder. So he picks his cloak up, brushes it down, dresses. He is unhurried, but he is meticulous. Make sure it's clean. Then he recovers his 3 knives, making sure to wipe them clean on the clothes of the dead. So he cleans his knives and then is sort of putting them away. Lastly, he collected his bolts, dispatching the wounded man with a swift knife cut across the throat. So again, everything is dispassionate, everything is careful, everything is meticulous, and none of it is done with emotion or anger. He picked up his crossbow and checked the mechanism for dirt. So again, like the cloak, like the knives, making sure that everything is functional, clean, ready for the next attack. This is meticulous and careful and studied. Without a backward glance, he strode to the horses. Wait, called the priest. Release me, please. The man turned. Why? He asked. The question was so casually put that the priest found himself momentarily unable to phrase an answer. So remember I said at the beginning that the perspective is with Dectus. Although Dectus is dead, the camera, the perspective is still there because it's still the stranger, the man, the priest. No one has been identified. And it's only in the next sort of section of this that perspective then moves closer to one of those. But at the minute, sort of the camera, the perspective is still with Dectus's corpse. That's the position we're being told this from. But another thing here is now that the guy's collected all of his weapons, checked the dead bodies, he moves on to get his horse, the reason he is there. He completely ignores the priest who's been tied up and tortured. And the priest says, "Oh, wait, release me, please." And the man is puzzled. Why? He wasn't there to rescue the priest. He's not there to do a good deed. He was there to get his horse, and he's killed the people who took his horse. He's now getting the horse. This gives such an insight into the focus and direction of the character, but also his morality. And I find it so fascinating. I think this is one of the best sort of openings of any of the Gemmell novels. It gets you so in depth with this character. You have, with these minimal descriptions, the black cloak, the black bolts, the black daggers, the broad black belt, all of that tying into this description. The fact that he is broad shouldered and he has a broad black belt. He's tall. He has a deep voice. The type of character being described. And none of it is detailed. We're not getting any huge insights or long descriptions. These are all tiny little moments. But at the end of this very short section, we have an idea of who this character is. We might know what his facial features are. We might know what color his eyes are or the shape of his jaw. But we have a real idea of who this character is, all from these tiny little moments. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that sort of just very brief look at the opening of this. It is one of my favorite books, or at least it used to be. I greatly enjoyed it when I was younger. And it's that sort of very minimal style that Gemmell uses, that Hemingway referred to as the iceberg storytelling method, that Gemmell describes so little on the top that is visible that we as reader are actually projecting a huge amount from that. We're extrapolating from that point to create this whole very vivid scene. But in that, Gemmell gives us the absolute bare minimum, but we are able to sketch very accurate and interesting perspectives and understandings of the characters from what Gemmell has put on the page. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.